Clive was my brother. He had absolutely an enormous positivity and energy. He refused to let yesterday affect tomorrow. He saw no barriers, no obstacles, even in the darkest of his days, and even in the situations he found himself in. He always had an ability, and I'll never understand to this day how he saw the good in everybody. Clive had epilepsy, and Clive had a learning disability. And the entire system consistently, repeatedly failed Clive up until the day he died. He was incredibly creative. His photography, his art, gardening was his passion. In a way, the garden has always been our family's sanctuary. It's peace. And the entrance of the gateway to the therapy in the garden is "Don't worry, be happy," because that was his motto. After Clive completed his education within a local community school, he was supported to go to a residential college. He ran towards that opportunity. Clive had real ambitions. He was driven to constantly learn. He wanted to seek as much of a challenge for himself as possible. I mean, there's an array of certificates that show you just the variation of his skills and talents. Even the medals that he won, he refused to take them off, but fundamentally, he wanted everybody to be proud of him. Unfortunately, what Clive encountered was something very different. Abuse within the environment. Abuse that was substantial and that it continued over a long period of time. Clive was removed for his safety. Unbeknownst to us as a family, the abuser continued to follow Clive through subsequent placements, and we were only made aware of this 5 years after the initial reason he was removed. When Clive was 28 years old, he returned home, which was everything that Mum and Dad had strived to achieve. Unfortunately, his epilepsy peaked to such a degree that brought Clive some challenges. He then subsequently spent the next 10 years of his life moving over 10 locations, and his epilepsy was the dominant force. Clive was capable of helping himself, but he was voiceless, so we became an advocacy. Mum and Dad was his natural advocacies. They asked me to participate in that process, and my job personally was to make sure Clive was asked first, and if he was incapacitated by his epilepsy or other health issues, or how he was feeling that day, he'd just give a nod or an instruction, and we would make very clear what Clive's expectations and ours were. That information was always received as insightful, grateful, but never actioned or recorded. His family had known nothing but encouragement, ambition, determination, bravery, but everybody else saw risks. Risk, risk, risk. That's all they ever saw when they looked at Clive. They never saw his capability or his possibilities. They certainly didn't believe in Clive. The assessment unit was a safeguarding transfer from a previous environment. When Clive entered the ATU, the treatment and assessment unit, there was an expectation that everybody had received the correct information and was aware of the challenges and the risks faced Clive with his epilepsy and the known risks of a higher mortality by the lack of awareness. Unfortunately, what we encountered for the first time in our lives and Clive's was a complete stone wall. We were literally not recognised as having any value, insight, input or safety in regards to assist others and how they could help Clive and keep him safe. That just led to a continuation of repeated complaints to the authorities, begging towards the end. Nobody recognised Clive's risks. We could see that we were losing Clive in front of us, and I will tell you directly, personally, I knew Clive was dying from October. His deterioration was evident and visible. We all did. But the cruelest thing that I'll never forgive them for is so did Clive. Clive knew he was dying and he made repeated statements. He was consistent in those facts. And that's the hardest thing that we will always carry.
Elaine and the Treacey family really fought to get the answers as to what had happened to Clive, and their efforts and their focus and their drive was instrumental in terms of us commissioning an independent review into the life and death of Clive Treacey.
We were able to look back across all the settings Clive lived in, and there were about 15 of them, but we focused mostly on the last 10 years of his life. We were also well resourced to do this review, so we were able to call on a lot of expertise, expert pharmacists, cardiologists, so forth. Very quickly I felt that Clive's life rather mirrored the lives of many other people with a learning disability. Clive had been lost in this set of services. You know, his voice and his aspirations in life had been completely lost along the way. And when you reviewed the records, you know, he was a series of labels. He wasn't the Clive that we came to know by talking to his family and building up a picture of who he was as a person. There were 10 findings in the review which reflected multiple system-wide failings. Clive experienced a very poor quality of care during his time in services, and he should not have been detained in services for the last 10 years of his life. He also experienced a number of different health inequalities and very poor support for his epilepsy, particularly in his last placement. And each of these things contributed to his potentially avoidable death. So we made 52 recommendations in the review, and you can read those in detail in the review and on the website. But what we had in Elaine was this wonderful driving force, and she wanted to know that those recommendations were delivered. A way of working emerged that's come to be called Clive's Way, and that really was to respect the positivity he had as a person and to not, I guess, fall into what many families might experience, which is the anger and disappointment and frustration with services about the usually really terrible experiences they've had. And Elaine was very clear. She wanted to continue in that spirit. She wanted to be involved. She wanted to see the recommendations delivered. And also she told us about something Mark, her late husband, said, which was, how are we ever going to change things if we don't let them try? And that's the way that Clive's Way has moved forward, in that spirit of positivity and with those challenges.
When we received the report, we didn't want it to be a report that sat on a shelf and just gathered dust. We wanted it to be something that made a real difference to people with a learning disability and changed clinical practice and improved outcomes for people. Epilepsy was a significant factor in Clive's death, and it's a significant factor that impacts on people with a learning disability. That was where we came up with the Clive Treacey checklist for epilepsy. And where we're seeing that implemented in practice, it's making significant differences for people like Clive who have a learning disability and also epilepsy. We also wanted to look at the over-medication. It was a significant element of the Clive Treacey review. The resources that we've pulled together have created a really excellent toolkit for people to utilise to improve care. And again, systems that are using it are making significant strides in people getting the right care and the right medications to enable them to live their best lives. Through the Clive Treacey report, we saw elements where commissioning was somewhat lacking. We wanted to bring together the expertise and the evidence base about how do you commission really good outcomes for people with a learning disability. We're now having a community of practice with people from both health and social care to really focus on how they can take that evidence and make tangible difference to the way that they commission care for people with a learning disability. which I'm hopeful will improve the outcomes in the longer term.
Clive has, I think, delivered lots of different things in the way people have listened to his story and committed with their hearts and minds to take things forward. And I think, although there's lots of specific things such as the wonderful work with the epilepsy checklist that is going to be a lasting legacy, if the one thing that people do in response to his story is just to look at their work, look at their decisions through the lens of Clive's story and commit to doing things differently, more creatively, then I think that will be an incredible legacy to leave people.
For me, the one thing that I absolutely hope we can change is putting back that level of ambition and hope for citizens with a learning disability to make a real difference to their lives and the outcomes to enable them to achieve their full potential.
We as a family want Clive's legacy to be what it's always been. We want people to touch their ambitions, run to their dreams, see no barriers and be supported with people around you who are believers. Clive himself, 2 words summed him up: hope and family. So I hope the Treacey family will give other families in Clive's name hope.